Hey everyone, welcome back to the Dairy Raid and another morning walk and talk, and as always another long delayed morning walk and talk. Delayed for a number of reasons. I mean, first and foremost obviously is the spring is the busy season for me in terms of the day job, with the Danish football season taking place largely in the spring. But now that we are wrapping up the spring portion of the season, our senior team plays their last game here before the summer break this weekend. Team that we are currently 4-0, averaging almost 50 points a game, giving up 19 total in 4 games. So, the Dairy Raid might be gone from Madison, but it lives on here in Denmark. And so that's opening up my schedule a little bit. Obviously, at the end of spring ball, there really isn't much for me and my niche in the Badger content space to talk about. We're in official visit season, a lot of recruiting stuff. And I gotta be honest, recruiting just isn't my bag. Because even from the X's and O's point of view, watching big fish in small ponds dominate against lesser competition, I can't evaluate the same way I would watching college ball. I'd much rather, to be honest, pay attention to the transfer portal than anything. But more importantly, there are way more people in the Badger content space who do way better work when it comes to recruiting. So I am going to leave that niche to them. And we're going to focus on, as we always do, the X's and O's and the players that drive those X's and O's. But it has been a long time since I put out anything, and I've been struggling to find some inspiration. That is until last week. I'm thumbing through YouTube to have something put on in the background of the office while I'm working. And I stumble across the YouTube channel of Reed Sinnott. And for the average football fan, you have no idea who that is, and why should you? He is a journeyman, third string, backup, camp arm, NFL QB, who this season is taking on the role as the starting quarterback for the Madrid Bravos of the European League of Football, kind of the successor to the NFL Europe, some of the same franchises, etc. And so he is quarterbacking the Madrid franchise. I have a personal connection to the league. My quarterback is actually the wide receiver coach for the Nordic Storm, which is a Copenhagen-based team in that league. And anyway, so getting back, watching Reed's first vlog, and he's there with some of his teammates, including Aaron Cruikshank, the former Rutgers, but also former Wisconsin kick returner and wide receiver. And immediately that pops in my head. Wow, that's a name I haven't thought about in a long time. Good to see that he's still playing ball. Man, I wish we could have found a way to use him better, because holy cow, can that kid run. And, got me going down a little bit of a rabbit hole looking at what he did at Rutgers after he left Wisconsin. And it showed me that, wow, why couldn't we get him on the field? He's obviously talented. Why would a player like that not be able to find playing time in Madison? So that's what this video is going to be about. It's going to be about the underappreciated, underutilized, undervalued pieces that could have been something in Madison if applied correctly. Now, obviously, we're looking at these players with hindsight. We're looking at these players through modern football eyes, and even though some of these players have only been out of Madison for a couple of years, we're looking at how offenses have changed since they were in Madison, and we're applying those sensibilities to this conversation. So it's not entirely fair, but it is a fun exercise, and I figured it'll give us something that we can talk about here. And it's going really windy if I get out in the open over there, so we're going to come back over here. Anyways, so let's get into this. So the first thing I do want to say is, as negative as I tend to be on this channel in regards to Paul Chryst and his offense, and I'm focusing right now on the Paul Chryst as the OC, Paul Chryst as the HC, and everything in between era of the players we're talking about. So as much as I criticize him in the past, one thing that they were really good at was finding roles for athletic players who didn't fit the college version of the role they played in high school. And we were really good at seemingly turning high school quarterbacks into fullbacks and linebackers and tight ends, and turning tight ends into offensive linemen, turning tight ends into defensive ends. I think we were really good at taking big bodies who are maybe slightly under skilled at their natural position and turning them into a slightly above average player at a new position. So you take someone like a David Edwards, who was a high school quarterback, was recruited as a tight end, and then was moved to offensive line in basically 3 consecutive seasons. And he put on 80-something pounds in 2 years. So he went from, a big load body playing quarterback in high school to an NFL offensive lineman. So I will never take that away from the coaching staff. They did a really good job of that. What they didn't really do a good job in Madison over the past, I'd say 15 years, is take athletes who had a specific skill set that maybe didn't quite fit the natural mold of the Wisconsin running back or wide receiver or quarterback. They weren't able to find ways to utilize them in the system. It was almost, my way or the highway kind of mentality. And so when we would get the glimpses of these players doing something incredible, doing something athletic, to Badger fans, a lot of us thought this was like revolutionizing and amazing football scheme, football skill, the vaunted jazz sweep that we all went crazy for in Madison, something that had been used around the country for years previous. So those are kind of the players I want to stick to. So let's start with the receivers or players who ended up playing a receiver that were either utilized maybe incorrectly or could have been better used at another position. Let's start with Crookshank. Crookshank is, sure, a one-trick pony. Maybe when he was in college. Fast as hell, straight line speed, was a north-south runner, a perfect kick returner. How we couldn't find a way to use him in the offense was very surprising. But when you look at the coaching staff's approach to the offensive scheme, it didn't surprise me. Their philosophy was basically you had to be an all-around, complete wide receiver to get playing time. And in an offense where you only ran mostly 2 receivers, sometimes 3, a player who is a situational guy who had a certain skill set didn't quite fit that mold. But what if he did? What if you brought in Crookshank and put him in the slot and have him run a seam? And then you run your tight end underneath that seam. What you're doing is you're creating high-low stress. You're creating vertical stress. Vertical stress was something that this Badgers offense never had. The vertical stress came from the running game, where you were hoping that whether it be from Melvin Gordon and Monte Ball to Jonathan Taylor to Braylon Allen, that they were going to pop one, and by popping one, you would invite more defenders into the box, and by doing so, open up things behind. They never set the top of the defense. Crookshank could have been that type of guy. Now, they used him sparingly as a jet sweeper, again, that jazz sweep, and a couple failed attempts as using him as a wildcat quarterback. To me, that just signified, I don't know what to do with this thing, so I'm just going to try something. When you take any offensive coordinator today, he's like, yeah, all right, I know what I'm going to do with that kid. I'm going to put him on the backside and run him out of post and run double post. If anything, he's going to be able to pull defenders with him. We'll be able to get the ball underneath. And in modern football today, excuse me, bug, kind of players don't sit on the bench. So it would have been nice to see, especially in an era where it seemed like as soon as good defenses figured out how to stop Jonathan Taylor, and not a lot of them did it, that we couldn't do anything because we never established the top of the defense, and we never forced the defense to play from top down. We allowed them to play from bottom up, and we couldn't beat them over the top when we needed to. Our route tree was very limited back then as well. So all that speed, and they used him just as a kick returner, just as a punt returner, and occasional jet sweep. Underutilized, in my opinion. All right, another one, kind of in the same era, is A.J. Taylor. A.J. Taylor came to Madison as 5'10", 5'11", around 200 pounds, a high school athlete. I believe he was a running back / quarterback / DB in high school. And they recruited him here, and they moved him to wide receiver, which, fine. He fit the mold of a Badger receiver in that time period. Again, right around 6 feet, right around 200 pounds. Not the fastest guy in the world. He wasn't slow, I'm not saying that. Not the shiftiest guy in the world. But he was a reliable, basically a possession receiver on the outside. And unfortunately, what came to be the problem with him is because he was slightly undersized, and because of how the offense used the passing game in correlation with the run game, they just put big bodies on him. They beat him up, and I think they took away a lot of the opportunities that he could have had. I think A.J. Taylor could have been that generation's Will Pauling. Because if you look at a lot of the reps he ended up getting, and a lot of the routes he ran a lot of hitches, a lot of slants, okay? Some crossing routes from the outside. They would put him on a post every now and then. to me, that screams possession slot receiver more than it does a flanker in a pro style offense. So, he was probably our leading receiving receiver at that time period, in the time period when our top 5 receivers during a season usually included a tight end and 2 running backs. He was that number 1 receiver. But did he ever break 40 catches in a season? And didn't he play on some pretty good Badger teams, and yet they still couldn't get him the ball more when he was our lead receiver? So, again, when you play an offense that has very dedicated positions, you have a tendency to overlook the complete package of a player. Could he do the role that he was asked to do? Yes, he was a starter, multi-year starter. But his role, when you combine his body type and the type of offense they were running, really underutilized his skill set. He was a good receiver. And he was a tough receiver. He could get those catches over the middle. He could break press sometime, but they limited his route tree. So, in my opinion, you move him inside, you isolate him on a nickel or a linebacker, and then again, you create a double seam problem for a defense that forces defenses to play a total structure instead of isolating a receiver on one side so they can bracket the tight end inside, etc. So those are a couple examples of receivers that, looking back, you wish they could have found a better role for. Obviously, going back in the day, we've had fast receivers in Madison, but we just never seemed to utilize them. We never took the top off of defenses. And, would have loved to see David Gilreath on the outside, forcing the defenses to play top down and then running underneath. And we always seem to have tight ends who could do that, but we could never utilize the receivers. So there's a couple examples in recent memory. If you don't believe me, go check YouTube and you can see their highlight clips. You can kind of see the route structures that they ran and think of an idea what they should have ran. All right, let's talk about running backs. And the first one I'm going to talk about is Isaac Guerendo. And Isaac Guerendo, I want to lump him back with the previous group, where maybe A.J. Taylor was a running back, turned into receiver, might have been a better possession slot receiver, might have been a better running back because of how he tended to run the ball after he caught the ball. Isaac Guerendo was a high school receiver, a high school track star, one of the best sprinters in Indiana State history, and came into Madison 6'1", around 200 pounds. Again, sound familiar? And they moved him to running back. And where he was stuck behind 2 things. He was stuck behind Jonathan Taylor and the injury bug. And then Braylon Allen. And he is another, I'm really glad to see that he went on to Louisville and they found a role for him and he was able to take that on to the NFL. That's awesome. He's another guy that, yes, I know your offense is essentially a two-back, 2-receiver offense. I get it. But when you have so much speed and agility on your team, why waste them as being second and third string guys? Because, well, you've got the bell cow back getting all the touches. And then maybe when it comes to third down, Garrett Groshek is a better pass blocker than Guerendo is. I mean, if the backup running back position is just going to be ballast anyways, Guarendo's too good to sit on the bench. So why not receiver? And, he packed on weight once he got to Madison. He had a receiver build when he came in. And I know people are going to say, he's 6'1". He's too small to be an outside receiver. Well, obviously we just talked about with AJ Taylor, but also go look at Quintez Cephas. First, look how he played, and then go look at his size. He was 6'1", 210, 211 pounds. Okay. Now, Quintez was a different player. He was a possession guy. He was a possession guy with long strides who, after he caught the ball, he could turn a catch into big yards. Guarendo, I think, would have been that counterpart. You put him, he would have lived in the slot. He could have been this offense's or that offense's Trechka Kahuna. AJ Taylor could have been their Will Pauling. He could have been their Trechka Kahuna. But he could have also, I think, been an inside-outside guy where you could put him on the outside in certain situations. He was big enough that he could handle blocking, fast enough that he could handle the entire route tree, physical enough that he could handle the entire route tree, and kept him on the field. But again, one of the biggest failings, I think, of the previous regimes in general, and this goes back all the way back to Bielema, if not farther, is the unwillingness to rely on young talent when talent wasn't complete. When Isaac Guarendo came into Madison, was he physically better than most of the receivers had on the roster? I'll let you debate that. But was he athletic enough and skilled enough that he should have gotten on the field sooner rather than later? Yes. Instead of just being a garbage time backup for 2 years, 3 years, gets chances to touch the ball, he takes it to the house type of guy. Got to find ways to get those guys on the field. And I struggle to find justifications when stuff like that happens. I mean, I remember back during 2020, the COVID year, where we had our established outside receivers, Danny Davis, etc. But when they get hurt, the coaching staff didn't put in the young guys. What'd they do? They brought in an extra running back. They brought in an extra tight end. And we're going to go back this way. So they just got bigger. They got safer. They tucked their head into their shell, and they turtled up. That is where, in a situation like that, where why not go big? Why not get these athletes on the field? You're already moving a guy in Braylon Allen who was supposed to be a linebacker to running back because you were short on running backs anyways. As soon as he established himself as your prototypical Wisconsin back, any back behind him with a different skill set wasn't going to get much playing time. And that proved to be true. So, yeah, Isaac Guarendo, another guy. Again, I get it. We were a two-back offense. But you can still find ways to get athletes on the field. And they should have with him. All right, last guy that I want to talk about. And I know I will catch crap for this because I have championed this player since he was recruited. And I was hoping he was going to be the next great Wisconsin QB because he was different. And they were going to find a way to use him. And it never happened. And that was Tanner McAvoy. Okay, so let's start here. Tanner McAvoy was not a pro-style QB. And when I looked at the offenses that Gary Anderson's OC, Matt Wells, used at Utah State with Chucky Keaton, I thought that Tanner McAvoy would have been a perfect fit for that kind of, again, power spread offense, the transition that you would want to see between the pro style to a modern college offense. He certainly would have been an improvement over Joel Stave at the time. And, well, two things happened. One, he got hurt. He broke his wrist in camp that year, his first year, 2013. So they let him play safety because at least that staff recognized he's too good an athlete. If he can play something, we might as well get some use for him. And when you have a 6'5" safety sitting over the middle, he actually turned out to be a pretty good one. That might have been the first mistake, was letting him go back to quarterback. Because, heck, at that size, he could have been a real matchup problem as a Travis Beckham, Lance Kendrick style tight end or a truly big wide receiver. But they recruited him as a quarterback. They wanted him to play quarterback. And what ended up happening is, I don't know why, but Andy Ludwig just ran the same old Wisconsin offense that they've always ran. An offense that he did not fit. And so it wasn't a shock when it didn't work out the way that they had expected. He would have been way more comfortable running zone read, running the early proto RPO style system, bring the tempo up a little bit, and I think it would have worked well. Imagine during that record-setting year of Melvin Gordon, if everybody in the stadium didn't know on a particular play that Melvin Gordon was going to get the football. What if there was even a 1% chance that on a run play someone else other than him was going to get the ball? Now, turn that into a 6'5" tight end with wide receiver speed playing quarterback, and you have a potent 1-2 punch. But they decided that wasn't what they were going to use him for. They tried him as a traditional quarterback. It did not work. They benched him, and the season is history. And then for his senior year, they moved him back to safety. They would use him as a wildcat quarterback in 2015. And the funny thing is, in situations like that, where again, Chris wasn't very solid at running zone read type concepts, but they bring him in to do it anyways. Everyone in the stadium knew he was going to do it, and he still rushed for 500 plus yards and a bunch of touchdowns. So imagine if they would have built an offense around it instead of just using him as a gadget guy. I think he's too good to have been used as a gadget guy. But I mean, seriously, we just want production out of the QB. If that production moves from, Joel Stave style passing numbers to, hell, even just take slightly worse of those numbers, but then you're gaining 600 or 700 yards and 6 or 7 touchdowns as a quarterback running the ball, and you are going to add yards to your feature backs totals from that. I guarantee when you have somebody holding the backside of a defense, skies would have been the limit. But using a mobile quarterback in that sense was not in the cards for offensive football in Madison at that time. And it's a shame because he was lightning with the ball in his hands. And in an offense where we basically only had one bell cow player. It would have been nice to have some kind of balance, other than throwing an occasional seam to a tight end, etc. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Tanner McAvoy. So, all things being considered, in the time period that I just talked about, we had some of the best offenses in Wisconsin history. When you have a feature player that you can build the entire offense around, it's not hard to have good offenses. And that, again, the string of running backs that they had, from John Clay to Monte Ball, James White, Melvin Gordon, Jonathan Taylor, and to a lesser extent Braylon Allen. Schools don't get that very often, and especially when they didn't have the other half of the coin to balance things. But if they utilize the players that I mentioned here, I'm not going to say better, I'm going to say differently, and where we would actually use their skill sets to add some flavor to the offense, not change the offense, add some more flavor, add some more dynamics in an offense that had no dynamics. It just had running back. I think those good offenses back then would have been great offenses. I think those are the type of offenses that would have hung with the teams in that era that we never could seem to beat. The Ohio States, the Penn States, etc. The Oregons when we played them in bowl games. The list could go on. So, again, as a spread air raid coach, that's how I see offense. Might be different, but that is what it is. All right. So I think we're going to call it there. We're almost home. And not quite sure what we're going to be doing dairy raid wise here up until fall camp. But if anything comes up where I can actually break down some film, some scheme, some X's and O's, and the players who execute them, I'll certainly be here to do it. Until then, thank you for watching, and we'll see you then.